So Jim Keravala has quite an impressive history of leading space developments and operations, from launch with Surrey satellite technology to a high-powered rocketry foundation to the board of directors of Pisces and the Moon Society. He's the COO and co-founder of Shackleton Energy Company, developing propellant depots and in-space transportation. Shackleton Energy is now creating an infrastructure that will form the platform of a major NewSpace solar power consortium, launching in September 2015 to address the grand global challenges of energy, fresh water, and global high-bandwidth communications with a single off-world solution. Please join me in welcoming Jim Keravala.
Good afternoon, everyone. Real pleasure to be here to share a little bit of what we're doing and in a very exciting venture going forward. I don't know if the screen, you can see the screen okay? That's always useful. But you know, there's a little anecdote. I think some of you have already heard a little bit about Shackleton Energy in the past. And for many of you, what I'm about to say is going to be new, as we've been having some successes going forward. But there's a little anecdote that I've recently heard about an experiment done in '69 with rhesus monkeys, so not far off relevant topics of all of us in the room. And the experiment was this. There were 5 monkeys in a cage and a bunch of bananas up on the ceiling. Between the monkeys and the bananas on the ceiling was a ladder. So of course, you know, we've got these 5 monkeys, they're looking up at these delicious bananas, and one of them starts climbing up the ladder to get to the bananas. As soon as that happens, the experimenter took a big hose pipe of cold water and sprayed that monkey on the ladder, knocked it off the ladder, and then, just for good measure, sprayed the other 4 monkeys till they were soaking wet, pissed off, and grumpy as hell. They sat on the floor for a few minutes. Another monkey starts to climb up the ladder. The experimenter again gets the hose, whack, throws the monkey off the ladder, and then the other 4 monkeys get sprayed as well, smashed into the corner. By the time the 3rd rhesus monkey tried to climb up the ladder, 2 of the 4 monkeys on the floor grabbed that monkey down, pulled it off the ladder, and believe it or not, started beating the monkey. A few minutes later, as the things died down, one of the other monkeys decided again to climb up. This time, 3 of the monkeys, as the water sprayed again, pulled the other monkey down, put it to the floor, and started beating it. This happened for a while, so that of course, the normal cycle was reinforced. And then one monkey was removed from the cage and a fresh monkey brought in. Now, the monkey that was new immediately saw the bananas, and there's no more water being sprayed. The new monkey goes up the ladder, tries to grab the banana. The 4 monkeys who originally got their butts whipped pull the monkey down and beat the bananas out of it. By now, this new monkey is kind of confused, and one of the remaining original 4 monkeys is then removed, and another fresh monkey brought in, and again the reinforcement is passed on till all 5 original monkeys are replaced. Now what you have in this cage is a dynamic of a self-learning community where any monkey trying to get up the ladder was pulled down off the ladder and beaten up. And it's very interesting. This is actually an experiment from 1969 on rhesus monkeys. And it's, I don't know how close human nature and rhesus monkey nature is, but I think we've learned there's a certain amount of cross-correlation in this anecdote. In that, I believe we had a bunch of bananas in the 60s that we saw and reached for as a community. And as of 1972, we kind of got water sprayed, and the hose hit again and again. As generations of us have emerged and come into the industry, and try to do the great things that we dream and hope for, and want to do and know that must be done, needs to be done, we have conditioned ourselves as a community not to climb up the ladder too fast or too far, because we're going to get sprayed and hosed. Well, I think it's time, probably after maybe 2 or 3 generations of getting wet, that we figure out that there is no more water to be sprayed, and we are actually in control of our own destiny and what we want to do in the way that needs to be done. And so I'm going to present to you what may seem a rather radical picture and with rather startling conclusions and events that have occurred. But I hope you bear with me, and I'll look forward to any questions at the end. As many of us know, one of the key challenges that we are facing as a global community and as a species is a population towards the end of the century between 9 to 11 billion people. And our current 15 to 17 terawatt power consumption will at least double by mid-century and maybe quadruple by 2100. This is an extraordinary burden on our planet, on our industrial infrastructure today, when we're barely keeping up with the power consumption and needs that we have. And whichever framework you look at, whichever forecasts, the range is very clear. In fact, some ranges are actually put the population near 15 to 18 billion people, and power consumption going over 100 terawatts. But if you just take the medians, we've already got enough trouble ahead. This has got to such a point that even in June, the leaders of the G7 actually proclaimed the eradication of fossil fuels by 2100. This is an extraordinary mandate to make at the G7 level, and this is something that has been codified on this multinational level. If we're going to reduce hydrocarbons, well, the only way to really do it is by trying to use renewables. We can use wind, hydropower, solar, and other methods. Nuclear is something that we attempt to do. Fission reactors are not in vogue at the moment, and fusion is always at least 30 years away from the commercialization of the first generation of commercial reactors from initial ignition to be proven. So we've got some extraordinary power consumption requirements and very limited options going forward. Our current solutions are to try and use renewables, terrestrial photovoltaics, and solar farms are a potential popular method today, but they'll require big base loading support, batteries, and an extreme amount of overage to take account of day-night cycles and other efficiency issues. But of course, if we imagine solar farms in space, we have another interesting advantage. Now, there's probably no one in this room who doesn't recognize the basic advantages of space-based solar power. Maybe 30 to 40 times the overall system end-to-end efficiency that you can get in space as opposed to having solar panels on the ground. But the real challenge with this is that with the size and mass of architecture required, this very optimum and very doable technical solution is probably one of the worst economic propositions you could imagine. The net present value of building such an infrastructure over the decades that you would require basically renders a program like this economically unsustainable if you try to launch it all from Earth. But luckily in space, we do need less infrastructure because of the increased efficiencies. And the opportunities are that we could address a great deal of the proportion of electricity power required. With that constant power requirement, desalination plants can be built to support freshwater delivery for regions and nations around the Earth that don't have it. And with an infrastructure like this in, say, geostationary orbit, the opportunity for supplementing your power business and infrastructure with ultra-high bandwidth communications also starts to increase in viability and attractiveness. Well, this is superb, but surely this is high in the sky. Launch costs today are tremendously ridiculous. It can be up to 50K per kilo in geostationary orbit and 5 to 10K to a low Earth orbit. And if you try to even imagine a linear progression of a 1 million-ton architecture in space, that's a $30 trillion energy infrastructure, which simply isn't going to happen. And the environmental burden of trying to launch 1 million tons of dry mass into orbit from Earth is nigh on impossible and would probably be criminal. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of trying to build a city on the east coast of America by transporting all of your base material from England and France in the 1600s. It's just not viable to do. So one solution to help us along is maybe when we get into some magic territory where launch costs really drop. But we know how hard it is to launch spacecraft. We are always on the knife edge, getting into low Earth orbit. Expendable vehicles are optimized for mass reduction, which makes them extremely prone to failure. Reusable vehicles are hard and single stage or dual stage air breathing make it even harder, and their mass to low Earth orbit is in the order of 10 to 20 tons as a limitation. So either way, we appear to be caught by going for a terrestrial based solution. But if we think in another way, if we think in systems and thinking down instead of up, there is of course the moon. The moon is currently calculated to have 1.6 billion tons of water ice in the polar regions. This represents, quite possibly, at this point in our species' history and development, the most important resource in the universe. The water at the poles of the moon. This is the most valuable commodity for expansion of humanity on Earth. The moon also has extensive minerals in terms of nickel, iron, titanium, silicates, oxygen, and other valuable commodities that can make up the mass of the majority of structure and infrastructure that we need for any activity. If we commoditize and build an amortized supply chain going up from Earth, reaching out to the lunar surface and the lunar poles, accessing the lunar polar water, building a reusable, refuelable infrastructure of transport systems on a modular plug-and-play basis, we can amortize the total cost function to bring access to geostationary Earth orbit to less than $250 per kilogram. $250 per kilogram becomes an enabling watershed for establishing ultra-large infrastructure in geostationary orbit. By providing that infrastructure of space-based solar power, we can alleviate the energy and fresh water limitations and burdens of a great majority of the population that exists today. Well, this is great as a concept, but how on earth could you imagine getting an infrastructure of this size and magnitude started? Well, Shackleton Energy has constructed a consortium and a partnership and a strategy to take this forward and actually make this happen in our lifetime, at least to get to the first stage that most of our generation will see this well underway, even though this is a multi-generational program. Program 1 is the lunar propellant supply chain. Many of you will have heard me drone on for a number of years about propellant depots, accessing lunar polar water, a human-tended lunar supply chain of modular vehicles and reusable systems that enable us to create fuel in low Earth orbit for a number of customers expanding forwards. This propellant in low Earth orbit sourced from the lunar poles is the key, the single key to enabling humanity to expand off and to build infrastructure of this nature. By building a space-based solar power architecture, with the initial small demonstration variants coming off Earth directly, and then building up in the interim a lunar manufacturing base and capability, allows us before the end of the 2030s, to start manufacturing modules on the lunar surface, transporting to assembly points in L1, and then deploying to geostationary orbit. This might all sound quite radical and far-fetched to many of us from the industry, but a lot of sober thought has gone into this. There is nothing that is technologically unfeasible about doing this. The biggest and greatest challenge are regulatory and financial challenges, and then organizing the programmatics around this. By taking a step-by-step modular approach in a specific architectural plan of common interfaces and standards that are opened up to the global industry, an infrastructure like this can be established and then maintained. The markets for this program are very significant. For the lunar fuel in space, there is at least an $80 billion market by the 2030 timeframe. And for communications or manufacturing, on the lunar surface, by 2050, a $100 billion market. And of course, energy transfer back to Earth's surface is a market, an addressable market in the trillions. Now, such an infrastructure will not be, and better not be, the only solution for what we are doing in terms of energy provision. But this is about energy provision to Earth's population, and as a backup to the terrestrial solutions that we currently are working on. But none of this is going to be about making trillionaires or anyone getting specifically rich. An infrastructure of this magnitude cannot be in the hands of a single company or a single country. This has to be a global play for the benefit of all. And the way we have structured this is something that I believe is internationally inclusive across multiple stakeholders. We are raising $18 billion for Program 1. We have secured the first financing for this program, and this is the underpinning and backbone for everything that follows afterwards. We spent over 20 years building the programmatics out, 4,000 man-years of expertise in the team, just under 20 major and small corporations from the aerospace, mining, oil and gas and aviation communities on the team and in the consortium going forward. And the way we structured this is that 90% of Shackleton's profits within this consortium structure will be returned back into a fund that is being established for the maintenance of programs 2 and 3. And by establishing this lunar supply chain, taking the business that we generate out of that, reinvesting those profits back into the fund that allows us to build this whole architecture, enables us to go forward, and enables us to go forward in an inclusive manner that brings in all of the international community to play at this planetary scale venture. There'll be 2 revenue generating assets in Program 1, primarily sales of fuel and the leasing and sales of the modular architecture. This program, on a success-oriented schedule, is about 8 years to initial operational capability, and then expanding from that development phase into revenue-generating operations thereafter. We will also be establishing in the next 5 years the world's first demonstration of a space-based solar power satellite. It will be very small, very minimal demonstrator, but it will be used to build up the next steps going forward as we expand out over the decades to come. The question then becomes, how does one structure something like this so that it lasts for decades, if not longer, is resilient, and is not subject to the vested interests of any one organization or any nation or other stakeholder. So we designed a structure that separates the governance of this undertaking across the issues of strategic direction, compliance, accountability, and execution. By separating the political and regulatory narrative from the funding and financing, and keeping that separate and compliant to the execution of the program, and then connecting those together with a common board of directors, we have built a council with an off-world fund and a series of off-world developers to enable this program to go forward. This is from our conversations with sovereign partners so far. This has been a solution that has seemed to, in our discussions, alleviated the issues of inclusivity for nations that are currently non-spacefaring, because all non-spacefaring nations can participate in the council, that is the political body of the consortium. They can contribute to the fund, and as their technology and their local indigenous industrial capability emerges, they can participate in the industrial consortium of off-world developers. Going into a little more detail on this, this allows us to create the council that will basically set on a year-by-year basis the ideals and the mandate in an off-world charter that basically sits on top of the Outer Space Treaty, that allows us to define which are going to be the first countries to receive this power and energy, how it's managed and controlled, which of the lowest GDP countries with the people in the greatest plight will have their ground segment of rectennas and desalination plants subsidized 100% by the consortium, and which countries will get 100% subsidies on the first energy transmissions, so that we can elevate, before the end of the century, the economic, health, educational, and resource plights of many of the countries in the direst need at the earlier stages. So what we're doing is using lunar resources to basically scale space-based solar power this century. And we'll be launching the Offworld Consortium in September. There's a lot of planning being going on for this. We have a key sovereign partner engaged and other sovereign partners coming on board. A number of industrial partners already signed up to this program. And I think what will be a very exciting venture going forward. I hope that all of us will be involved as time progresses. And this is something that I think is going to be the stuff of dreams that we all look forward to, and hopefully we'll make it work together. So thank you very much. So that's a brief intro. I'm happy to answer any questions that may arise.
If you have both the financial resources and technical know-how to put 1 million tons in geostationary orbit, do you think we'll still be reliant on solar power? Do you think the power will actually still be really a major issue at that point?
I think the energy requirements will continue to be an urgent issue going forward into the decades throughout the century. It's difficult to forecast exactly to what extent, what the nature of that will be. And I actually hope at some point downstream that we have all sorts of other energy solutions emerging as well. This cannot be the only large-scale planetary-based solution. So I certainly hope that there will be competing and alternative sources of energy emerging as rapidly as possible.
I think think I missed that part. How does the energy get transmitted back to Earth?
So that's transmitted back by excuse me, low power density microwave beams, currently baselined at a 2.45 gigahertz frequency, from transmitters at the stations to 5 to 10 kilometer wide rectangles on the ground. So it's a very low power density microwave beam with less intensity than sunlight at midday, and the radiation wavelength means at about a 5 to 8 centimeter wavelength, there's no ionizing radiation, so it doesn't affect any chemical bonds. So there's no issues of any health issues or anything like that.
So will the amount of heat that you add to the planet be offset sufficiently by the heat that we're not going to generate?
It's a good question. The actual, when you consider the amount of solar flux that hits the Earth, the amount of additional energy that is focused and transmitted to the Earth is less than a fraction of a percent, a tiny fraction of a percent. So the actual heating and solar effects are practically negligible. I think the real issue to think about is the offset of carbon-producing energy sources on Earth that this could alleviate and offset. That creates a far greater impact.
So going back to the monkeys, where have you gotten at the highest level of government and the space industry and investors the biggest pushback and the biggest support?
So the biggest support has come from heads of state and energy ministers in terms of medium to long-term energy security on a national and global basis. The biggest pushback has come on credibility and confidence in the ability to address some of the low TRL technologies at the pace we need, and to generate the long-term financing structure born out of our initial assumptions on the propellant business. So there are challenges to the program. The fact that we can start this is in itself an extraordinary opportunity, but it is only the start of the challenge. There is, every step of the way, we are going to be having significant headwinds, a lot of challenges, both technical, programmatic, on the regulatory fronts, political and financial. So it's the kind of thing that's worth sinking our teeth into. Al?
You may not be able to answer this, and that's okay if you can. How much capital do you need to get started, and how much capital do you have?
So the full program one is about $18 billion. We have a staging gate of single billions. I'll keep it to that level of fidelity. And we have a portion of that committed already, and a route to securing the remaining single billions within a short period of time. So we have by no means solved all of the financial picture, but one of the key challenges has always been to get a lead investor and a structure that enables multi-stakeholder types of investors to come into the frame to invest and participate. And I think we've solved many of those challenges as we go out of the gate in September.
Two questions. One, as you're looking to these offload solutions for global burn challenges, have you thought about any engineering, perhaps any of the interesting engineering solutions for our climate issues? For instance, if you're talking about the climate or doing something along those lines. And the second question I had is, are you in a place to discuss it?
So in terms of climate issues, we are not really out to address any climate issues. We don't make any claims on what we can do for the climate. All we can say is we can add to a solution that by the end of the century should provide a portion of Earth's extremely clean and safe energy provision to locations on the ground that don't have it and to those that need it. In terms of the human activities, this is, to the fullest extent possible, this is an autonomous architecture. But building this system out is going to require human interaction from day one. As we test out new systems in unstructured environments, especially on the lunar surface, extracting polar water, that's going to be an extraordinarily harsh and vicious environment at 30 Kelvin with rock-hard permafrosted regolith or some other form. Machines are going to break and they're going to need maintenance, and they're going to need systems that can be developed in situ and maintained in situ. So for the first instances, we're going to need boots on the ground so that the human infrastructure is built out hand in hand with the robotic systems.
How much water do you need? What's your idea of how much water you need?
So the current estimates are about 1 billion tons in the southern polar region and about 600 billion tons in the northern regions. We have a maximum requirement of 1,080 tons in 2023. That includes both the transportation propellant for Shackleton and sales propellant. And that would increase to the orders of thousands of tons a year of utility. So effectively what we would need to use would be a small portion of one crater's resource to harvest. So a very tiny fraction to enable the infrastructure to kick off in the early stages. As that scales and expands, we can use potentially more subterranean mining for mineral resources so that we maintain environmental harmony with the surface of the moon. And then I would say by mid-century we should have a strong capability to harvest near-Earth asteroids and other systems, because we'll have the delta V and the hardware to actually make that economically feasible. Any final questions? Yes.
You're talking about putting together a coalition that will control a significant portion of the world's energy generation. How do you propose to avoid that being kind of like political level?
Right. So the way we started out, when we considered this exact question of how do you create something that has a planetary scale mandate and yet not concentrate political power or control in the decision-making hands of a few. We initially started off with the Intelsat ComSat model for the consortium and took that as a baseline to build out forward, and then adapted that. And just like there were multiple stages where Intelsat converted its structure and format and went forward, there is a point, excuse me, there is a point in the consortium where the structure of the consortium at Program 3 takes ownership of the space-based solar power architecture, and then the frequencies and control and ownership is distributed amongst the sovereign nations that are utilizing that power, so that there is sovereign control over their own power systems and architecture, and then they just purchase services for maintenance and growth from there. So it basically emerges and ends up much like today's ComSat architecture, where you have manufacturers and operators servicing the needs of nations and other organizations. And that works well over a multiple competitive basis quite nicely.
In order to accomplish or to deliver the performance, what would the size of the solar constellation be?
The solar constellation?
Yeah.
Well, how high is up, really? The very first ones are going to be extraordinarily challenging to build and make, as the learning curve is going to be quite significant. Towards the end of the century, there are estimates from the power consumption requirements on Earth could be 50 to 100 terawatts. If that proportion, as the G7 indicates, if by that time there is a reduction or elimination of fossil fuels, that energy has to be generated somewhere. So there is a chance that we may be generating multiple terawatts of power from the space-based architecture. The geostationary grid, if you like, at that point in time, by end of century, could be in the thousands of units of these solar power stations, each one of them 2 to 5 kilometers across.
So if the yield is 30 to 40 times better, I still, and you're looking at the cost to build this, I don't understand why you can't just allocate, a vast area of Earth to accomplish the same thing at a significantly lower cost.
Yes. So there are a lot of proponents who say, well, you could put a bunch of several hundred square kilometers of solar power generating capability in the desert and just create solar farms in the desert, and that's a possibility. You do have maintenance issues. You then have transmission losses, and then you have base loading requirements of extraordinary amounts of batteries and energy storage. So these solutions are technically and architecturally possible, and sure, I mean, DLR did lots of studies on concentrated solar power as well, using water cycles and concentrated mirrors in Sahara to power up to a third of Europe's electricity. But the infrastructure cost, again, is significant, but that's not anything different. It becomes a question of real practicality of whether that can be done. This is not a mutually exclusive game. So I hope that groups try and expand as much as possible. And if at the end of the day or at the end of the century, we have 10 or 20 or 30 terawatts coming from space and a burgeoning space infrastructure with transportation systems, human transport, operations on the lunar surface, and expansion into other locations, I think this is a great advantage on top of any terrestrial solutions that may also hopefully arise.
You mentioned that you think the Earth-based system is not a very practical system, but then you think that putting like 1 million tons in geostationary orbit would be a less practical option than, say, just putting like 4 solar farms, strategically geographical positions around Earth, maybe one in Australia, one in the Sahara, one in South America, and then just having, say, superconductors. And that's one question. And then, I guess, I don't know if you have.
So just to close on this answer, I mean, today we've got 7 billion people online, another 2.5 to 3 billion people coming up by 2050, just 35 years' time. Maybe another billion after that, and the power consumption going 4 to 6 times. Whichever way you look at it, we are all sitting here with a challenge. And please go ahead and start that project and go for it and do it. We'll try and do what we can at our end. Love to partner with you and see what you do and keep going at your end. Build that up. If you want to see it happen, go and do it. It needs to be done. It needs to be done. We can do our part. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I think the additional benefits for existential risk reduction of expanding humanity off Earth make this a valid proposition. And the fact is, we are starting in September. Thank you very much.
I'm sure y'all have lots more questions for Jim. I think he'll be around for the rest of the conference. Come find him. So we're going to get started in the main ballroom pretty much immediately. So if we could transition to that room fairly quickly, that would be fantastic. Sales schedule. Thank you.